and I are mourning the loss of one of Bothel's finest last night. We also want to send our thoughts to the other officer who was injured in the incident in Bothell. We know that much more information will be forthcoming. We're pleased the suspect has been apprehended, and we want to send our deepest condolences to this family. We know that is indescribably painful. They're not the only members of law enforcement we're appreciative of. Trudy and I were driving in Kitsap County last Friday when a wrong-way driver was coming in our direction, and before, several minutes before we got to where they were, that car was intercepted by State Trooper Jessica Schaub, who put her cruiser right into the car's path, and the collision sent her vehicle off the road. Fortunately, she had minor injuries, and we are very appreciative of her heroism, putting herself in danger's way, which I think saved some people significant injury, if not worse, thanks to Trooper Schaub. With that, we'll turn to our COVID efforts. Dr. Kathy Lofi is with us today to answer some questions. We'll start by saying yesterday I had a conversation with the Vice President, with other governors. I told the Vice President that I thought it was a really good thing that he had been wearing a mask recently. He said that he would continue that. And it was a good thing that the President, for the first time, is displaying using a mask. I expressed to him that that was very important because we need to improve our mask usage in the state of Washington. We know it saves lives. So we hope that that will continue from the top leadership in Washington, D.C. But we're not just depending on Washington, D.C., of course. We're moving here in Washington State. And we have a number of local leaders, both Democrats and Republicans, who are helping to lead this mask up effort. As you know, we were one of probably the first in the nation to engage our business community in this effort, and it's paying off. We were really happy to hear that the latest survey in Yakima County showed about 95% of people at given stores were wearing masks. And that's really impressive because just a few weeks ago, only about a third of people were using masks. So what we know is that this effort is working. Washingtonians are masking up. They're showing that they care about their communities and their loved ones and the people who are serving them food at the grocery stores. We appreciate that we're making great progress on this effort very, very quickly, frankly. There's also some evidence that this is working. In Yakima County, case numbers are actually declining since this masking effort started. We have evidence that the number of cases, the hospitalizations, and the transmission rate have decreased this month. You've seen this on this graph that's on the screen, on a variety of measures. So that's good news, and if we keep this up, there's a reason to believe that we're going to be in better shape. Now, that having been said, we have to face a brutal truth, unfortunately, and that this pandemic is still raging in the state of Washington. It's growing. This pandemic, this virus is growing in the state of Washington. That's painful to say, but it is a reality, and we don't shy away from the truth in our state. And we do not intend to yield to that growth. We have made too much progress. We've paid too dear a price to allow us to withdraw from this threat. So we're not going to allow those sacrifices that have been made to be made for nothing. We know that other states have been forced to close some of their additional businesses as they have become overwhelmed by the virus. So we have to make a decision, and what we've seen is that cases are growing here. If you see in this graph, they have grown fairly dramatically over the last month, and are now higher on a daily basis than when we hit what we thought was a peak a couple of months ago. So with the spread of the virus, we need to continue to pause the reopening of our economy in further phases. And I announced this almost 2 weeks ago, and we will need to continue that pause as we continue to study the upward trend in the cases. So this pause is going to continue at least until July 28th. If I can, I'd like to share with you the projections of this virus if we do not change the course of this disease. I'd like to show you a graph, and you might be familiar with this by now. This is the R0 number, or RE number. This shows the number of people that when one person is infected, how many people they infect. The purple line is for Western Washington, the red line is for Eastern Washington. You'll see in the recent weeks they have both been over 1. The horizontal line shows 1. And they're both above 1. This is the danger zone. This is the red zone, because anytime that number is above 1, this pandemic grows, because each person who is infected infects more than one other person. In Western Washington, this has now risen to it's probably over 1.5. That means every person who gets the virus infects 1.5 more people. That means it grows exponentially. So for every 10 or 12 days, 100 people who have the virus today, in 10 or 12 days, 160 people have the virus, and continue to grow in that regard. So this is a very dangerous position we are in. We are not in as bad a shape as some other states. Arizona, Florida, their case rates are sometimes 5 times higher than ours on a per capita basis. But we have to look where we're going to be, not just where we are. And we are heading to big trouble if we do not figure out a way to knock this pandemic down. This is particularly important right now, because what we do right now, this week, next week, is going to determine what this virus looks like in the fall, when we're making our best efforts to have the best educational opportunities for our kids as possible. So you can't overstate how important this moment is in this course of this pandemic. There's also something that's been happening I want to share with you that is concerning, in that there is a growing percentage of the cases involving Washingtonians in their 20s. This problem does not have implications just for our colleges, but for the whole state. And the reason is twofold, obviously. We care about people in their 20s, and we care about them in their own health, but we also care about the people around them, their fellow students who might be immunosuppressed, their parents, their grandparents, their uncles, their aunts. And even if somebody's 25 and feels they're immortal, the fact is they can go out and transmit this disease to somebody they love or a fellow student who has an underlying health condition. So our ability to help this generation be safe, wear masks, avoid situations where you can't socially distance, is really important. A few hours ago, I had a really good discussion with leaders from some of our colleges and universities in the state, and they gave me their thoughts about what we could do to help their age group. And I was really encouraged to hear from them about how seriously they took their leadership responsibilities. And they gave me some good ideas about testing, about a hopeful message that we should feel hopeful that if we do wear masks, this will be faster. We get back to days where we can be involved in get-togethers that don't involve social distancing. They gave me ideas about thinking about protecting their fellow students. This isn't just about protecting dad, mom, or grandpa. It's about protecting fellow students who might have underlying health conditions. And they made some really good suggestions about how to be influencing their peers in social media, which we appreciated. We also know that it's not just social habits. We know people in this generation have to have more jobs that involve contact with the public, which puts them at a heightened risk for exposure. So we know that this is a generation we want to help for their health and everybody around them, and I appreciate young leaders who are helping us in this regard. So we thank them for that effort. We know we are all in this together, whatever age group we are in the state of Washington. Now, we know that public health matters to everyone, and we know that what happens in the next few weeks will determine what happens this fall. When we announced this pause, we also removed live entertainment and bar top service from the current phases that counties may be under. This is very important. People who may be enjoying themselves can also be infecting others in these facilities, and we simply have to make prudent decisions in this regard. So people should not be surprised if more gets rolled back depending on the course of this pandemic, and that's going to be influenced by how many people wear masks and how many people decide to socially distance. And that's going to be determinative about our decisions in the next few days. This week, governors of California and Oregon announced the return of certain restrictions, and those are possibilities here as well. Doing so would be really tough decisions. But the status quo we know is very, very dangerous right now, and we cannot accept the worst case scenario of experience what Arizona, Florida, or New York had experienced. There's some good news today, too, for college students, and particularly our international students, many of whom will become our physicians and be caring for us, and our scientists and our businesses, people starting new businesses. And that is that today the White House retreated and rescinded its rule that would have kicked out of our state international students if their classes weren't in person in the fall. This was really a ridiculous proposal. It would have hurt our colleges, our universities, the students, and our economy. And it does reinforce this, that we will not be bullied in the state of Washington. We did not back down, that was clear, and we were allied with other states in this regard. And we will take the same position if the White House attempted to remove our funding for our K through 12 systems as well. We're going to control our own destiny in Washington. We are going to make decisions based on science and the health of our students, and that will remain. Dr. Lofi and I will take some questions. I did want to welcome the news that the Washington, D.C. is changing their name, their mascot. That was long overdue. We know that that team's name represented really hurtful oppression of our tribal communities. I'm glad that decision was made. With that, happy to stand for questions.
First question comes from Rachel with AP.
Rachel?
Sorry, technical difficulties. How likely is it that come July 28th, there may need to be additional business restrictions rolling back, like we have seen in California and Oregon, like you mentioned? And then also, do you have information on the number of complaints received about businesses not complying with the mask order and whether any action has been taken?
You know, I missed the first part of your question. Could you repeat the first part of your question, Rachel?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Just how likely is it that come July 28th, when this pause should be lifted, that you might need to take an additional step by either rolling back phases or implementing additional business restrictions like we've seen in California and Oregon?
There is a significant chance that we would have to take some of these measures. And the reason is we are seeing a significant spread of this virus. We are seeing a positivity rate and a hospitalization rate that have crept upwards. And we have to have confidence that other measures are going to arrest these measures. So I would categorize it as a significant risk. And by the way, it doesn't have to wait till July 28th. These are decisions we can have to make on a 24-hour basis at times. So I am simultaneously hopeful that we're going to see a continued and increasing social distancing and masking, and recognition that that may not be enough, given the numbers that we are seeing. We simply cannot and will not accept a situation where our hospitals are overwhelmed. And the scenes that we were seeing today in Florida and Arizona should not be repeated in Spokane and Tacoma. So I will tell you that these are distinct possibilities. As far as the complaints, I believe there have been some. I don't have an idea for numbers. I'll ask people to get you some further information about that. I don't, to my knowledge, I'm unaware of any enforcement activity that's taken place, but I can tell you I'm very, very pleased with this effort to date. Look, going from 35% masking in Yakima about 3 weeks ago to 95% now, that's pretty amazing achievement for us to pull off. And I'm sure it's happened because we've had some business leaders who have helped. We've had some public local leaders who have helped. So it shows to me that people are pitching in. They want to help. They understand that the mask is a signal that you care about other people. And we're making good science-based decisions. So I'm really happy that the direction this is going right now on the masking part of this.
Rachel, would you like to ask a follow-up?
And this question would probably be for Dr. Lopey. Do you have an update on the number of contact tracers and any obstacles they are encountering in their work?
Tracers, this activity is currently split. Part of the contact tracing is done at the local health departments throughout the state, and then we have contact tracers at the state level that are picking up the cases from the counties that don't have the resources on the ground to do that. And I guess one thing that I will say is that with this significant increase in the number of cases, we've really, needed to surge up the number of individuals who are contact tracing. We are in the process of finishing the training for some of the National Guard who were originally trained in the first and second phase to bring additional folks online. And the other thing I'll just mention about the increasing case counts is that not only has that increased the need to do more contact tracing, but we're also now detecting more and more outbreaks. And those also need to be responded to. We need to go to the business, if it's a business, and investigate who may have been exposed at the business and make sure that people are getting tested and staying home in isolation and quarantine.
Next question comes from Joe with the Seattle Times.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Joe.
Hey, so a question for the governor and one for Dr. Lopey. For Dr. Lopey, what specific sort of outbreaks are you seeing? Are you seeing a trend? Is it restaurants or retail stores or is it nursing homes? Are there any geographical trends or is it spread evenly? And for the governor, what sort of metrics are you specifically looking at in the coming days to make further decisions? Is it just the transmission rate and the number of infected cases? And I know the broad menu that you usually look at, but what are you most concerned about on that?
Go ahead, Kathy.
Open of the outbreaks. What I can tell you is that, first of all, they are happening throughout the state, more frequently in the counties with the higher incidence of disease currently. And unfortunately, we're seeing these outbreaks. We continue to see these outbreaks in just a wide variety of settings, which makes it very hard to target our interventions. So we are seeing outbreaks that are associated with businesses, with manufacturing, with food production businesses, restaurants, some, child or child care type settings, some healthcare settings. It's really, really including long-term care facilities. It is really just across the board, unfortunately, which indicates to me that we have not only high increasing incidence of disease throughout our state, but we also have very widespread disease in all of our communities, which again makes it more difficult to control when we don't have an industry that we can just target, which really highlights the need for everybody to do their part in this outbreak, and for everyone to make sure that they're really limiting their social interactions. It's incredibly important. And making sure people are wearing masks when they're with other people, and making sure that they're keeping that 6-foot distance.
What we will be looking at, if I could pick three things. Number one, the positivity rate of the percentage of people who are positive of those who are tested. That has risen recently. It was in the 4% range. Recently, it's gone up to as high as, I think, 8 or even over 8 on a couple days. And so that is a very important number because it's not varied by the number of tests you do. It's a percentage of those who are tested. We are not at the 25% level like Arizona or Florida, but we are still in Yakima and Benton Franklin County in that range. Thankfully, the state is not, but it has trended upward fairly consistently in the last 2 or 3 weeks. The other is the count itself, the number of people who are demonstrated. That count is important, and that has gone up. It is double what it was several weeks ago. And also the hospitalization rate, both on a gross number of people who are hospitalized every day, and also the percentage that those people represent of everyone in the hospital, those two numbers are early predictors of potential fatalities. And the thing that all of those numbers have in common is that they are growing relatively at a stable rate. And that can lull you to sleep. We are not seeing the explosive rise like we did in March. Instead, we are seeing this steady climb. But you can wake up one morning and you're in the same position as Arizona and Florida with that steady climb, and that's what we are experiencing right now. So somehow we have to break that climb to get to a plateau and then to knock those numbers down over time. We have a chance, we think, of that, but we have to figure out something to change that dynamic, the climb in those 3 numbers in just the next few days, perhaps, to be able to have assurance that we can continue to avoid this problem in the fall. And obviously, we want to have the richest educational experience with as much in-person classroom education as possible with our students. And that's why we're thinking right now that this is such a critical moment.
Joe, would you like to ask a follow-up?
No, it's fine. Thank you.
Next question comes from AJ with Q13.
I have 2 questions, one for Dr. Lofi and then one for Governor Inslee. Dr. Lofi, I just wanted to see if you could explain a little bit more in detail regarding this headline that came out today with the changed reporting system and the difference in numbers that have come out, specifically 39 less fatal cases. And then Governor Inslee, if you could explain in a little bit more detail, as someone listening to your words, it seems very likely, unless there's a big change, that we're going to be possibly taking a step back. If that is the case, what does that look like?
Well, I'll go first. First off, we wish we had certainty, that we wish we knew what we were doing next Monday and the following Monday and the Monday after that. We just can't give you any real predictions. These are possibilities at the moment. So I'm describing to you some of our considerations and our thinking because we want to have total transparency with the public on this. What I'm describing is that the situation we are in is unsustainable. We will have to reduce the rise that is occurring now in the case counts, in the positivity, and in the hospitalizations. We have to find somewhere to break that chain of looming disaster. That's a certainty. Now, how we do that, how fast we do that is a matter of just judgment and looking at these metrics on a daily basis. So what I'm telling you, there is a possibility that is not insignificant that we will have to take some further actions. Now, we have in the last few days, we've closed bar service. We've basically said you can't have live entertainment. We're doing our mask effort, and we're the first state in the country to ask our business leaders to help in this regard. So we have been taking action the last couple of weeks, but more may be necessary. Now, what that could look like, and I, to some degree, don't want to answer your question because these are just possibilities at this moment, but there are obvious things that you could do to unwind some of the things we've done in bars and indoor seating and restaurants and the like. Those are things that could be under consideration. It's not a decision. It's just an honest discussion of where our state is right now.
So I can talk a little bit about I think you're referring to our death report. So today we're publishing a report that goes into more detail about how we're categorizing our deaths. I think the take-home message is we collect lab results on individuals who test positive, and then if if our investigator learns that the individual has passed away, we include that death we indicate that in their record. But we also look at the death certificates that are coming in. And of all of the people who have lab confirmed COVID who then go on to die, 90% of them have COVID listed on their death certificate as their cause of death. And then there's this smaller proportion, about 10%, that died, but they don't have an indication that it doesn't specifically say COVID-19 on their death certificate, but they died of a natural cause, like a heart attack. Or a respiratory, or a respiratory failure. And we often think that those deaths are attributed to the COVID infection. But if our local health departments, do an in-depth investigation and they learn that no, really this death is not related, that we're now removing, those deaths from our death count. So there is this small percentage of individuals who die shortly after their diagnosis, and we have to do further investigation and, really try to determine, if those individuals, did if COVID did contribute to their death. And we do initially count them, and then if we do find out later, well, no, it really maybe didn't have an effect on their death, then we will remove that death certificate now. The bottom line is it is really a very small percent that happens to.
If I can just comment on that, it would be such a waste if we quibble about whether this number is 1,000 or 1,100 or. We know that this is a very serious disease. It's killing hundreds of people. It has the prospect to kill thousands of more in our state, and we need to act. And we're acting on the best information, and I'm glad the department is being as transparent as possible. We also know that we're certain that there are people dying of COVID who never are tested, and so are not picked up in our situation. That is becoming an increasing recognition of that phenomenon across the country. So we know one thing, in that too many Washingtonians are dying. It demands a response, and we're making sure that it gets it.
AJ, would you like to ask a follow-up?
I just want to reiterate, so I understand, because that was a lot of big words, but for lay people, just trying to reiterate it. The numbers might not be 100% accurate, specifically for deaths. That being said, what I'm hearing both parties say is that it's obviously serious. One death is too many, and there are deaths that are uncounted because they're not going through the medical field.
Yeah, I would just amend that a little bit to, it's not just one death. We're over 1,000 deaths here. And so it's just shocking to me that people want to make some argument that it's going to make a big difference, that it's okay if, 1,100 people die. If it gets to be 1,105, then we'll act. This is well beyond this debate. This is an incredibly serious issue. Over 1,000 people have died. And again, I want to reiterate, you look at the course we were on, which are thousands more will die if we do not act. And so this is kind of an interesting academic debate. I'm glad that the department is being as careful as they can on it, but it's not going to affect our basic assessment of this, that we need to act.
Next question comes from Alexis with the News Tribune.
Probably for Dr. Lofi, some jury trials have been able to resume in the past week. Given the rise in cases, do you think courts are taking appropriate precautions? Do they seem to be following Department of Health guidance to keep people in courthouses safe? And are there any particular challenges you think they face going forward?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying the Department of Health did work work very closely with the courts to put together guidance, because when the courts resume, we do want them, to be very safe. And so we spent a very long time understanding their system and making sure that, the guidance we gave them would help to keep everyone safe. In terms of the risk to individuals, that really depends largely on how much transmission is occurring, within their community. So, yeah, now that we have increasing transmission in many of our communities, we do worry more about transmission in any settings in those communities, not just courts, but anytime people are coming together, there's more risk that somebody's going to become sick if there's a higher incidence in the community. I know that when we put the guidance together, there were many challenges that we had to deal with. Of course, we wanted people to sit 6 feet apart, and there's not always a lot of space in a courtroom to do that. And I know that the courts have been really responsive and really, done everything they could, are doing everything they can to really abide by, the guidance that we've put together.
Alexis, would you like to ask a follow-up?
No, thank you.
Next question comes from Keith with Coma.
Governor, how close are you getting to have to follow what Los Angeles schools, San Diego schools are going to tell students and teachers in the fall that there just won't be any in-school classes because of the concern for COVID?
Well, there hasn't been a change since we last addressed this issue. The current plan is to have on-site instruction to the extent that the districts believe are safe, and we've given strong guidance about how to do that. I'm meeting the superintendent of instruction in the next couple of days and probably have more to say about that. But we do believe there is still a path to be able to have on-site instruction in our schools. It might be only 2 days a week in some districts. So there's still a number of systems that schools could use. But this is dependent on our ability to keep these numbers down, and that is why our Mask Up initiative is so critical. Mask up so we can open up schools. It's pretty simple. Mask up so we can open up businesses. And we're going to continue to monitor this pandemic. But at the moment, our course is to allow schools to make those decisions based on the guidance that we have set out. And they have told us, and I'll be talking to some school district administrators and principals here in the next few days, that they think there are some ways we could have creative situations where it may not be full-time, but it might be part-time. And others may adopt other measures to make it fully remote. So this is going to give creativity and flexibility to the local schools and the local communities to make these decisions. But as I have said, I'm encouraged what we are all doing, wearing these masks, in the last week. And maybe that means people want to give our kids a better shot. I'm real happy about that.
Keith, would you like to ask a follow-up?
Yeah, for Dr. Lofi, if the governor wants to respond as well. When you look at the numbers, the raw cases are increasing, but the hospitalizations of COVID patients is right around 2% level. And you look at the deaths, yes, they are slowly rising, but it's nothing like what we see around the country. How do you explain the huge number of cases, yet the relatively small number of hospitalizations and deaths?
Yeah, we think that difference is maybe the disassociation or the different rate of spread, or the different rate in increasing case counts and increasing hospitalizations, we think is, at least partly, maybe mostly due to the fact that now we are having a much younger population that's getting infected. There was a report that our modeling group put out about a week or two ago that showed the shifting demographics of people affected during this outbreak, and there's been a shift to a much younger age distribution. And we do know that those who are younger are less likely to be hospitalized and have severe disease. So, we think that we're really seeing a lot of spread now among the younger population, and, to date, it, has not the rate of increase in hospitalizations has not been quite as steep, but I'm really concerned about the fact that our hospitalizations are going up. And we know that it is still affecting people who are at risk for severe disease. And I'm just really worried about the trend that we're currently seeing in our hospitalization data.
One of the things, if I can share, because I look at these things every single day, is that there is such a mirage of security when you look at these numbers. So I'll look at some of these numbers of the daily hospitalizations and I'll think, well, that's not too bad. It didn't go up that much. We're really not that bad. Just went up 3 or 4. But when you look at it over time, you see this steady increase that is relatively significant over the last several weeks. And that is doubly concerning because we think this, or at least I think, it's the problem is being masqueraded by the fact that we're having a larger cohort of the people who are infected be young people because they're not getting as sick. We know they're not as vulnerable as older people. But those people are going to spread the infection, and our modelers have made this clear. Maybe this week and the next week it's the 20-year-olds, but in week 3, 4, and 5, it's the parents, and in week 6, 7, it's the grandparents because they're going to transmit it. That's when you really get the explosion of the hospitalization. We think that's, to some degree, what has happened in Arizona and Florida. So we just can't be lulled by the fact that you can drown with the tide coming in if you don't move, even though it's really slow, just as much as you can as a big instant wave. And that's the situation we're looking at as an incoming tide, in my view.
Next question comes from Jim with the spokesman review.
Governor, or maybe Dr. Lofi, I'm wondering to what you attribute some of these rises in the figures, like the rise in positivity and the rise in the R0 number, because it can't just, as you said, it can't just be because of more tests.
Kathy, do you want to address that? I have an answer.
Yeah, that's correct. And that the rising testing positivity and the rising R0 is essentially telling us that it's not due to more testing. It's due to more disease activity and more transmission in our communities. And to make things really simple, the disease spreads when people come in close contact with each other. And since we're seeing more spread in our communities, that essentially is telling us that there's more people that are coming into close contact with each other and spreading this virus. And I'm particularly concerned about a lot of the social events that people have been going to, and I just think it's really, really important for people to remember, particularly if you're in a phase 2 county, that you're really not supposed to be coming into contact with more than 5 people outside of your household per week. And that means when you do come into contact with those individuals, you are still wearing a mask and you are still social distancing from those individuals. And if you're going to see them, it's really best to see them outside. But I'm just really concerned that, the gatherings are getting bigger and more frequent, and we really all need to do our part and to really limit our social interactions to just a few, as few as possible.
Jim, would you like to ask a follow-up?
Governor, I'm wondering if you're thinking that maybe the state opened up some counties too soon.
Well, I really don't think you can make judgments like that. We made good decisions based on science, and we are not unaware of the economic pain that people have felt not having jobs and businesses. So I wouldn't be critical at this moment about those decisions. What I would say is that we have one period of time where we can affect the future, and that's today, and that's what we're focused on. And we know that this is going to be an iterative process. We knew that we were going to be making twists and turns, and we're right in the middle of that, and we're learning. And I think the important thing to realize is that we learn things. And what we've learned is the current condition that we are in demands a change. This is a clear lesson, and we intend to learn it. We've been successful to date because we have. It's why this masking initiative that is coming on, we think it has shown early success. So what I would say is it is not surprising In a pandemic, which we have never experienced, we would learn as we have gone along. And I'm glad we are. I'm glad we will continue to do so. And I want to thank Washingtonians are helping. By the way, I want to thank again the shout out to the medical professionals who we believe are improving their treatment of people as well. They're learning hard lessons, nurses going in there in long shifts, and respiratory therapists and physicians. We think one of the reasons the fatality rate has not gone up as fast as the infection rate is because of improved medical treatment. And we thank people for their Herculean efforts in this regard.
Next question comes from Hannah with Cairo Radio.
Governor, I'm curious, you mentioned medical professionals, and I know after the initial phase of COVID that we had here, there were many layoffs at a lot of our major hospitals across the state. How confident are you that if we continue to see this spread and this raging spread of the virus across the state, that we have the medical team members that we need to handle it? And then Dr. Lofi, for you, I'm wondering if you can tell me if you are seeing any cases of children getting the virus who become sick, or any cases of children getting the virus and passing it to an adult who gets very sick.
As far as the medical capacity, we judge this every single day. It's on our website. You can see the capacity and the surge capacity of the hospitals. We want to keep it below 80%. It generally is below that number. But there are increasing, I know a week before last in Yakima, they expressed concerns about staffing. So what we know is at the moment, we have adequate hospital capacity, and we have a surge capacity in reserve that is still available. That's good news. But we also know that if current trends continue, if we do not change the rate of increase of this virus, we will run out of staff and space in our hospitals. That's going to happen if we don't change things. So when that date would happen, when those lines were crossed, I can't tell you, but they will. That's why we have to slow down the rate of this pandemic. And that's why we ought to, in my view, all look for ways to do that. I want to reiterate Kathy's message. I was thinking of the old Nat King Cole song and back in the day of roll out the barrel, we'll have a barrel of fun. We're doing that, and as a result, we're getting a lot more people infected. And Memorial Day, 4th of July, great celebrations, parties inside, outside, upside down. We just have to be more careful right now. And if we are, we're going to avoid the kind of problem you just asked about.
I could speak a little bit to kids getting sick. So we are seeing kids become infected with this virus here in Washington. And in fact, I just am looking at the modeling report that just came out, I think a week or two ago. And it looks like that the proportion of cases among like 10 to 19-year-olds in King County, the proportion of all of their cases, 12% of 10 to 19-year-olds are represented, and they're in the overall population, they represent 11% of the population. So what I'm trying to say is that, the proportion of these 10 to 19-year-olds getting sick in King County is the same as the proportion of their population. It's a little bit lower in other counties, but kids are getting sick. Generally, the literature shows us that kids do tend to get sick less frequently, and when they do get sick, they have milder illness, which is great. It also looks like kids are less likely. The literature suggests that kids are less likely to pass it to other people, but that doesn't mean that it never happens. I think we're seeing some of the same trends, but, there are a fair number of kids that are sick right now, and we actually just ran these numbers to look at what the numbers would look like in terms of schools. And, like, if we were to start school, how many kids do we think would be getting sick in the various classrooms? And, at the current activity, there's a fair number of kids that are going to be sick in our schools. And that's going to be pretty disruptive to schools. And so we really, as the governor has mentioned, need to do everything we can right now to try to slow down this virus. or else we're going to have just, we continue on this path, we are going to have a tremendous amount of activity here in Washington come the end of August.
Hannah, would you like to ask a follow-up?
To the governor, I've heard you kind of mention this a couple of times. It sounds like you've got a lot of concern about bars, people going out partying, having a good time, drinking, and perhaps spreading the virus. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, we know one thing for sure, and that is humans coming into contact with another is the only way this virus gets propagated. And so anything that makes that more likely, makes it more likely that this pandemic is going to grow. So we know that in any social setting, that is a very natural thing. We come close to each other. We love to go into large groups in all kinds of settings. And whether that's in a bar or in a restaurant or in a home at a birthday party, or young people celebrating with their favorite brew by the dozens, any and all of those things increase the transmission rates. And it's not a shock that that is doubly dangerous when alcohol is involved, because people tend to forget their teachings of science and physics and chemistry while they're enjoying alcohol, sometimes too much. So it is a significant concern. We cannot give you a specific percentage of what happens in a bar compared to what happens in a social setting in a home or a backyard that's packed in with people. But we know it's happening, and we were particularly concerned with the increase in the rates of some of our younger generation as well that we think could be involved in this. So this is not just something we take, I guess the point I want to make is this is not just something we can solve at a business or at our work site or in our hospitals. The solution is in not having that party and just hanging with the same 5 people instead of 50 people, particularly indoors where this is much more transmittable. So that's where we think the battle is going to be won or lost.
Time for a few more questions. Next question comes from Jerry with the Everett Herald.
Governor, you and Dr. Lofi today seem to have made the clear case, if not ironclad case, for rolling back restrictions, but you won't roll them back today. Are you contemplating action, some kind of an enforcement action to slow these large gatherings, to kind of drive by and educate the people holding parties at their home? What steps are being taken, since that seems to be the problem?
Well, number one, we are looking for success of the masking initiative. We think there is very good scientific reason to believe it is going to have a beneficial impact. But we can't make decisions just on the assumption that that will work. The virus is too deep and there's too much community spread to put all your chips just on masks. So we're watching that very closely to see if we can see signs of success on the masking initiative. But yes, we are actively considering other options should they become necessary. Now we're also having a communication effort to share scientific information with Washingtonians about the impact of mask usage and the impact of social distancing when we're in social settings. And we hope that that can encourage people in the right direction. And that should start in a few days. We hope that you enjoy it on your in various media. So we're acting on that. But I do want to reiterate, because when you're in the midst of a moment like this where we understand we've got a dire threat, we also have literally millions of Washingtonians who are pitching in on this. This is quite a remarkable thing that in few weeks we have changed what we wear. That's pretty amazing. I mean, the clothing industry spends tens of millions of dollars trying to convince us to change the kind of collar we're wearing. And yet we have seen millions of Washingtonians agree to wear a mask routinely. And so there's really good reason to believe we are going to do good things here if we keep pitching in together.
Jerry, would you like to ask a follow-up?
Sure. Let me move to the switch of the economy and what could happen if you do roll back restrictions. It'll just get tougher. But the state's already facing a cash deficit in its current budget, if I read all the documents right. And it would seem the law requires you to bring lawmakers back to deal with that, to spend down the rainy day fund. Is that not the law in your view, or is that your understanding? And why? And will you have to call them back?
No, we think we're in a stable position to be able to keep going forward, most probably to January, and we think that for a variety of reasons we're in that position. And I've talked to legislators, and I think that'll be our course.
Next question comes from Carolyn with the South Seattle Emerald.
Hi, yes, Governor. Are you considering extending relief efforts, such as eviction moratorium, given the fact that we're approaching the August 1st end date for said eviction moratorium, and we've still not managed to get the virus under control? And if not, is the state putting together some sort of program for renter relief with special consideration for more vulnerable communities, such as those who are housing unstable, that have been most negatively impacted by the virus?
Yes, we are considering that. I don't have a decision for you for sure today, but we are actively considering that.
Carolyn, would you like to ask a follow-up?
Yes, yeah. This is based on Joe from Seattle's question, because previously you've been more vague about what would make you roll counties back to previous phases or impose new restrictions, except to say that would depend on the variety of metrics with which the state is tracking and measuring the pandemic. But in response to Joe's question, you narrowed down the metrics you'd be focusing on. Since you have these metrics narrowed down now, what will these numbers have to be to roll back counties into earlier phases or impose new statewide restrictions or mandates, given the current spiking of the virus?
They would need to be a combination, and by the way, Joe wanted me to limit it, but those are not the only metrics. He asked me to look at the ones that were most important. There are other metrics that we will look at as well, including our hospital surge capacity and our hospital rates and our staffing rates and our testing capabilities. So there are many more metrics other than the ones. Joe wanted me to give you the top three. But the combination of those metrics will if we're going to continue on the current course of our phases, would have to convince us that we will knock down this pandemic, and that with this rate of increase will decline or go to neutral, so that we can have a good educational system in place in the fall. And we will look at a combination of those. Now, that is not one single number. I would not be doing my job if I gave you one single fictitious number. There is no such fictitious number. There is judgment involving all of those in their relative predictive value and our ability to beat this thing. And we're watching it very, very carefully every single day. When I get my epidemiological report, it's the most exciting part of my day to see how we're doing. So this is something we watch very, very carefully.
Final question comes from Michael with the Washington State Wire.
Thank you. This is for either the governor or Dr. Lofi. Given that labs like Quest Diagnostics have announced that average turnaround time for getting COVID test results is now 7 days compared with 2 to 3 days in early June, how can the state make progress on contact tracing with these delays in turnaround time for tests in conjunction with rising consumer demand?
Well, this is a challenge because these southern states are creating a huge demand on these commercial labs. I think what I heard this morning, that about 80% of our lab results do not come from those two commercial labs. They come mostly from our internal labs in the state of Washington. So that's a small, relatively small percentage that are experiencing that particular problem. But we need additional help from the federal government. I've said this now for 4 or 5 months. We need the federal government to use the Defense Production Act to increase the production of reagents, chemicals, and other materials that are necessary to be able to run these tests. We have concern about that the reagents are going to run short. so that could affect potentially our in-state lab producers. And we need the federal government to be more aggressive and show more national leadership on this. So we have more work to do on this because you're right. We need to have a very rapid turnaround time so that our contact tracing can be successful. And we need national leadership to help in that regard.
Michael, would you like to ask a follow-up?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you.
Any last words, Governor?
No, again, thank everybody. You're participating in a unique experience in Washington State history. Except maybe in 1917, 1918, we've never done something together so fast, which is to mask up. And I want to thank everybody for that historic mission statement we're on. We want it to succeed. So please wash your hands, mask up. Thanks very much.